Have you ever noticed how, like, massive organizations, the ones with genuinely brilliant people and just huge budgets,
Right.
how they seem to endlessly manage problems without ever actually solving the root cause?
Oh,
You
absolutely.
see it everywhere. I mean, homelessness, corporate misconduct, bad lawmaking, even, the existential risks around artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's a very recognizable pattern.
Right. It feels like society has 1,000 of these highly funded entities just circling these
Just
issues.
producing endless reports.
Exactly. Reports, task forces, advisory committees, but the core problems just sit there perfectly intact. So today, you and I are doing a deep dive into an essay that explains the hidden architecture behind this whole phenomenon.
Yeah, it's an incredible piece.
It really is. It's called The Mandate Trap by Elias Kunis. And the mission of our discussion today is to figure out why these problem-solving organizations inevitably morph into organs of problem management and, what that silent shift actually means for civilization as a whole.
And what's fascinating here is that the author, he bypasses the usual cynical narratives right out of the gate.
Which is so refreshing.
Right. Because when we look at a massive institution failing to solve a problem, our first instinct is usually to blame the people involved.
Oh, for sure. We assume it's just corrupt bureaucrats or, lazy politicians.
Or just simple corporate greed. But Kunis argues this is actually a story about evolution and structural selection.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a massive civilizational failure hiding in plain sight. And it happens not because the people inside these organizations are malicious, but because they're trapped.
Trapped in the architecture.
Exactly. Trapped in an institutional architecture that selects for something completely different than what it claims to be doing.
Well, the most visible symptom of this trap is what the essay calls the not our mandate excuse.
Oh, yeah. The classic deflection.
Right. If you have ever worked in the public sector or dealt with large institutions, you know this exact dynamic. Someone brings a brilliant, upstream root cause fix to a highly competent NGO or a respected think tank.
And the response is always.
It's always a polite deflection. They tell you, oh, it's a fascinating idea, but it falls outside our scope.
Right. Not our mandate.
Exactly. They point to the organization next door, and then that organization points to the next one. They point sideways, they point downwards, but nobody ever points up to the actual root of the problem.
And the crazy part is each of those organizations is telling the technical truth.
Wait, really?
Yeah. That upstream fix genuinely is outside of their officially sanctioned mandate.
Okay, let's unpack this, because my immediate reaction to that dynamic is just deep skepticism.
Sure.
It feels like they're just hypocrites protecting their phony baloney jobs, It reminds me of, a commercial gym.
Okay, Jim.
Yeah.
I like that.
Right, a gym that makes all its money off monthly memberships. They claim they want you to be in peak physical condition, but structurally. They do not actually want you to get fit enough to quit the gym and work out independently.
They need you dependent.
Exactly. They need you dependent on their equipment and their trainers to keep the revenue flowing. So it's really hard not to look at these massive think tanks and NGOs and assume they are doing the exact same thing.
Intentionally keeping the problem alive.
Right, to protect their own existence.
Well, it's a completely natural reaction to view it through that lens. But Kunis gently corrects that level of cynicism.
Okay. How so?
He uses what he calls a mechanism realist analysis. He completely moves away from moralistic judgments.
So no good guys and bad guys.
Right. To use your gym analogy, the personal trainers on the floor genuinely want you to get fit. They are sincere people working really hard.
Okay, that's fair.
The people at these NGOs and think tanks are also highly sincere. The contradiction lies in the gap between an organization's mission and its telos.
Right, the mission being the verbal component, like what they print on the glossy brochures or announce on their websites.
Yes, the mission answers what the organization says it is for.
Yeah.
But the telos drawing on the Aristotelian concept that's entirely structural.
Okay.
It's what the organization's structure actually selects for in order to maintain its funding, its status, and its legitimacy in the real world.
That makes sense.
And to explain how this gap forms, the essay borrows a concept from AI alignment. It's called mesa optimization.
Mesa optimization, that is a heavy piece of jargon.
It is, yeah.
But to bring that down to earth, we can think about it like a high school standardized testing environment, right?
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, so the school, which is the outer environment, wants students to learn math. That's the mission. But to measure that, the environment creates standardized tests.
Right.
So the student, who is the inner optimizer, realizes that to survive and get good grades, they don't actually need to learn math. They just need to learn how to hack the multiple choice test.
Okay.
The outer environment's pressure creates an inner optimizer whose real goals have drifted completely away from the original intent.
That is a perfect parallel.
Hmm.
Because in the context of the mandate trap, the outer environment consists of grant funding, public status, political legitimacy.
Right?
And that environment creates an inner optimizer, which is the organization itself. The organization is forced to optimize for whatever keeps the lights on and the payroll funded.
Which is usually not solving the problem.
Exactly. So when a radical upstream fix threatens the existence of the organization, they do not maliciously gather in a boardroom to conspire against it.
They're not twirling their mustaches.
No. Instead, the organization's immune system just kicks in automatically. It absorbs the radical fix and translates it into the only outputs the organization knows how to produce to justify its funding.
Oh, wow. So it turns a genuine threat to its existence into like a stakeholder workshop or a shiny new report or a set of voluntary guidelines. The radical fix is completely neutralized by the machinery of the organization itself.
It just digests the solution and turns it into another PDF.
That is so depressing. But if the organization's telos is simply to survive and process these inputs, we have to look at what exactly it's feeding on, right? Like what keeps it alive.
Right. And this brings us to Kunis's distinction between capital stocks and problem stocks.
Okay, let's get into that.
So civilization basically operates on capital stocks. This includes human capital, cognitive capital, housing capital, institutional capital.
Oh.
These are the underlying resources that make a society function smoothly.
The good stuff.
Right. But when one of those capital stocks breaks down or is severely misallocated, it generates a problem stock.
So a problem stock is the visible, durable condition that results from that systemic breakdown.
Exactly.
Like homelessness is the problem stock that appears when housing capital or mental health infrastructure fails.
Yes.
Child poverty is a problem stock. It's the highly visible liability just sitting there on society's ledger.
And because these problem stocks are so visible and honestly so painful to look at, they legitimately demand intervention. Society looks at the issue and demands that something be done.
Naturally.
That public outcry creates a mandate, and that mandate spawns an organization designed to address it. But here is the funding trap. The architecture almost always rewards the organization for managing the visible problem stock, not for depleting it.
Wait, because funders, even the most well-intentioned philanthropic groups or government agencies, they attach their money to measurable deliverables.
Yes, exactly.
They want to see the number of caseloads handled, the number of meals served, headcounts of people sheltered, or the volume of reports published.
Right.
And all of those metrics inherently scale with the management of the problem.
And because they scale with management, they actively penalize the verified depletion of the root cause.
Oh my God, I just realized the dark logic here. If someone actually invents an upstream repair, a true root cause fix that permanently depletes the problem stock, the downstream organization loses the very metrics it uses to justify its budget.
The funding dries up.
They experience a literal cure for the problem as institutional displacement. That is a heavy realization.
It really is. And Kunis introduces a chilling term for this dynamic operating at a civilizational scale. He calls it the cancer constraint.
The cancer constraint.
Yeah. We bleed an enormous amount of resources trying to coordinate around the boundary of a problem, managing its symptoms rather than actually solving it.
Wow.
The dark evolutionary truth here is that the organizations throughout history that actually solved their root problems and subsequently disappeared were selected out of the evolutionary pool.
Because they didn't survive.
Exactly. We do not see them anymore because they went extinct by succeeding. What we are left with is the residue. We have an entire ecosystem of organizations that have successfully converted their specific problem into a durable, permanent mandate.
Mandate lock-in.
Mandate lock-in.
So if the structures are this deeply flawed, the immediate question for anyone listening is, well, should we just defund all these downstream organizations?
A lot of people might jump to that conclusion.
Right. Should society just burn down the think tanks, defund the homeless shelters, and disband the evaluation labs because they are ultimately just managing a stock?
The author is incredibly emphatic that we should absolutely not do that.
Okay, why not?
Because downstream organs are not the failure here. Kunis uses a very clean analogy to clarify this. An ambulance service does vital, life-saving work every single day without ever redesigning the roads or engineering safer cars.
Right. You wouldn't defund the ambulances just because people keep crashing.
Exactly. A homeless shelter keeps people from freezing to death, without redesigning the structural flaws of the housing market. The pathology is not that downstream organs exist.
The pathology is that civilization mistakes those downstream organs for the missing upstream organ.
Yes.
We look at a massive, highly funded fleet of ambulances, and we trick ourselves into thinking we've solved the traffic engineering problem.
We mistake managing the damage for preventing the collision.
That is such a powerful way to put it. And to illustrate how this plays out in reality, the essay provides a really specific data-driven comparison of homelessness governance in San Francisco versus Houston.
Yeah, this part is fascinating.
The data is striking. And it is important to note for you listening that Kunas is not making a political or ideological point here.
Not at all.
Right. He's making a purely structural point about how systems are designed. We're just reporting the data from the source. So San Francisco adopted an $846.3 million homelessness department budget for the 2024-2025 fiscal year.
Which is a massive amount of funding.
Massive. And they did achieve measurable things with that money. They reported a 22% decline in unsheltered homelessness,
Okay.
which proves that downstream organizations do manage the visible stock well on a local level.
Yeah.
But when a California state auditor looked at the broader systemic picture, they found massive fragmentation. They identified over 30 state programs operating with completely untracked outcomes. It's a sprawling, highly fragmented ecosystem of downstream management that does not communicate with itself.
Contrast that structural reality with Houston. Over the last decade, Houston reported a 60% reduction in homelessness.
Wow.
And the text insists this is not because Houston's NGOs are morally superior or staffed by more virtuous people than the organizations in San Francisco.
Right. It's not about the people.
The difference is entirely about selection pressure. Houston's system was coordinated strictly around permanent housing placements, which is an upstream fix.
Okay.
The funding and the oversight were centralized, meaning the ecosystem of NGOs had to operate as a single entity focused on one metric: getting people off the street permanently.
So they aligned the incentives.
Exactly. When you change what the system actually rewards, the population of organizations that grows up around that funding optimizes differently. Houston structurally rewarded stock depletion, whereas San Francisco's fragmented system structurally rewarded stock management.
Which brings us to the structural vacancy at the center of all this, the invisible void in how we govern massive systems.
Yeah.
Because everyone is pointing sideways and claiming, not our mandate, it creates an endless loop where nobody actually owns the route fix. The ambulance drivers are waiting for the road engineers, and the road engineers are waiting for the city planners, and nothing changes.
The author gives a specific name to this structurally vacant function. He calls it Mechanism Lifecycle Ownership.
Mechanism lifecycle ownership. What does that actually look like?
Well, taking ownership of a mechanism's life cycle means stepping far beyond just researching a problem or advocating for a policy change. It means testing a proposed mechanism before it's installed,
Okay.
monitoring it closely once it's deployed into the real world, detecting when it inevitably starts to fail, and crucially, having the actual institutional authority to force a repair or legally demand an explanation for why it failed.
So it's got teeth.
Exactly. It's the work of taking full responsibility for a mechanism's existence over time.
Do we have anything like that right now?
The text highlights several agonizingly close attempts at this. We have organizations that get right to the edge of life cycle ownership, but structurally fall short.
The frustrating almost.
Right. For instance, the UK Office for Budget Responsibility. They produce incredibly rigorous, independent fiscal forecasts.
Right.
But they have zero authority to bind the government to actually respond to them.
Oh, man.
Or the Wales Future Generations Commissioner. They have this amazing cross-departmental scope to look at long-term impacts, but possess only advisory authority. They can only make strong suggestions.
Basically just sending an email saying, hey, maybe don't do this.
Pretty much. And in the U.S., the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, they find staggering amounts of waste and inefficiency, but Congress is totally free to ignore their recommendations.
So they all have the evaluation half of the equation, but the actuation half is entirely missing.
Yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This applies to artificial intelligence in a way that is incredibly urgent. The mandate trap is playing out in the AI domain in sharper form than almost anywhere else right now. We have brilliantly staffed AI safety institutes and independent evaluation bodies.
Some of the smartest people in the world.
Right, and they're generating vital findings about dangerous model behavior. They can diagnose the exact mechanisms of failure in these massive, opaque systems.
But they completely lack the actual authority to halt a deployment.
Right.
They can write a comprehensive, terrifying technical paper about an AI model's capabilities, and the tech company can simply acknowledge the feedback and launch the model anyway.
They just say thanks for the notes and push it live.
Kunis summarizes this with a brutal realization. Cognition without actuation is not governance.
Cognition without actuation is not governance. That's a great line.
We are generating a massive growing stock of brilliant diagnoses with no upstream organ that can convert those diagnoses into binding, real-world responses. It's mission without life cycle ownership.
Okay, but if the solution is to create this missing upstream organ, we run straight into what the essay calls the recursive objection.
Ah, yes, the elephant in the room.
Right. I'm sure you listening are thinking this right now. If we create a new mechanism authority to own the life cycle and force repairs, won't that authority eventually fall into the exact same mandate trap?
That's a very fair question.
Won't it just become another bloated bureaucracy, optimizing for its own survival and protecting its own existence?
And the author is intellectually honest about this reality. He concedes that, yes, eventually it will.
It will.
Yeah. No human institution is permanently exempt from structural selection pressure. Gravity always wins eventually.
So what's the point?
Well, the blueprint he proposes is based on a bet on structure, not virtue. The goal is not to find incorruptible angels to staff this new authority. The goal is to build in structural delay mechanisms to keep the trap from closing for as long as possible.
Oh, I see. We can actually see this in how modern legal systems are structured, right? Like, we purposely separate prosecutors from judges because we know that combining those functions into one person or one office creates an undeniable conflict of interest.
Right.
The Kunis blueprint suggests applying that exact same logic to how we govern complex problems. He lays out 4 specific structural remedies to delay the mandate trap.
Let's run through them.
The first is precisely that. Separate evidence organs from repair organs. If the same governmental body that identifies a systemic failure is also expected to fix it, they will always prioritize the easy, highly visible work of gathering evidence over the agonizingly difficult, invisible work of executing the repair.
They will just keep commissioning studies to prove they are working.
Exactly. Just endless task forces.
The second structural remedy is to fundamentally change the funding models.
Yeah.
Fund problem stock depletion, not problem stock management. If you are a philanthropic funder or a government grant distributor, you have to attach your money to the verified reduction of the root cause. You shift the metrics from measuring the throughput of services, like how many people walk through the clinic doors, to measuring how many cases were permanently closed because the underlying issue was resolved.
Which forces the inner optimizer to actually solve the problem.
Precisely.
Okay. The third remedy is fascinating because of the political friction it would create. Kunis suggests making the phrase, "not our mandate," trigger an automatic referral.
This is such a smart structural fix.
Right now, when a massive agency or think tank says, "that is not our job," the conversation just ends. The void stays invisible. But Kunis argues we need a legal or structural system where claiming a problem is outside your mandate automatically triggers a formal referral to the entity whose mandate it actually is.
And if you realize that entity does not exist,
The gap suddenly becomes politically visible.
exactly.
The vacancy becomes a glaring, undeniable public issue that demands an answer.
And the fourth and final piece of the blueprint is to attach findings to actual public duties.
Okay.
An evaluation or diagnostic report is just passive information until it triggers a hard deadline, a legally mandated repair path, and a mechanism for public override.
So you can't just publish a PDF and walk away.
Exactly. Without a legally binding duty attached to the finding, the immune system of these institutions simply routes the information into endless discourse in advisory committees.
Right.
But with a duty attached, the institutional gravity reverses. The burden of proof shifts, and the question becomes, how will the responsible governing body justify ignoring this specific finding to the public?
That's a total game changer. Well, we have covered an enormous amount of ground today, tracing this problem from the daily frustrations of the "not our mandate" excuse all the way up to civilizational architecture.
It's a big topic.
It really is. The core takeaway from this deep dive is that we cannot rely on moral exhortation to fix our deepest systemic problems. We cannot just yell at organizations to try harder or attempt to hire more virtuous people to staff them.
It doesn't work.
No. We have to change the structural selection pressures, and we actually have to build the missing upstream organs. So if you are listening to this and thinking about your own workplace or your own industry, take a hard look at the structures around you. Are the incentives and the funding rewarding the actual depletion of a problem, or are they just rewarding the endless profitable management of it?
That is the ultimate diagnostic question for any institution. And the essay leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought on how we should measure true institutional success.
Let's hear it.
Kunis points out that almost no organizations write sunset clauses into their founding documents.
Right, they all plan to exist forever.
Exactly. But if true success actually means depleting the problem stock until it is entirely eradicated, shouldn't the ultimate mark of a healthy, triumphant organization be its willingness to plan its own institutional suicide?
Wow.
Yeah.
An organization so genuinely dedicated to solving its problem that it actively engineers its own extinction. It is the exact opposite of the endless problem management we opened with today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and keep looking upstream.